Joshua chapter 8. And the Lord said to Joshua, "You should not fear, nor should you be timid. Take with you all the men making war, and rising up, ascend unto Ai. Behold, I give into your hands the king of Ai, and his people, and his city, and his land. And you shall do to Ai and her king in which manner you did to Jericho and her king, and her spoils and her cattle you shall despoil for yourself. But place for yourself an ambush for the city to the rear of her." And Joshua rose up, and all the people, the warriors, so as to ascend to Ai. And Joshua chose 30,000 men, mighty in strength, and sent them by night. And he gave charge to them, saying, "See that you lie in wait to the city, behind the city greatly, and you shall all be prepared. And I, and all the ones with me, will lead forward to the city. And it will be as whenever the ones dwelling in Ai should come forth to meet us, just as also the day before, and we fled from their face, that whenever they should come forth after us, we shall draw them away from the city. And when they will say, 'They flee from our face, in which manner before?' that we shall flee from them. And you shall rise up from out of the ambush, and you shall go into the city, and shall obliterate the city. And the Lord our God shall give it into our hands. And it will be, whenever you should seize the city, burn it by fire. According to this matter you shall act. Behold, I have given charge to you." And Joshua sent them, and they went to the ambush, and sat in place between Bethel and between Ai, from the west of Ai. And Joshua lodged that night in the midst of the people. And Joshua, rising early in the morning, numbered the people. And they ascended, he and the elders of Israel, before the face of the people against Ai. And all the people, the warrior, the one with him, ascended. And going, they came right opposite the city from the east. And the ambushes of the city were from the west, and they encamped from north of Ai. And the valley was between it and Ai. And he took about 5,000 men, and stationed them in ambush between Bethel and Ai, west of Ai. And he arranged all the people of the camp, which was from north to the city, and the ends of it west of the city. And Joshua went that night in the midst of the valley. And it happened, as the king of Ai beheld, that he hastened and rose early. And there went forth the men of the city to meet them straight on into the battle, he and all his people, at the opportune time, in front of the wilderness. And he knew not that an ambush against him is behind the city. And Joshua and all Israel beheld, and withdrew from in front of them. And Israel fled by the way of the wilderness. And all the people of Ai grew in strength to pursue after them of the sons of Israel. And they departed from the city. They did not leave behind any one in Ai and in Bethel who pursued not after Israel. And they left the city being open, and pursued after Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Stretch out your hand with the javelin in your hand against the city, for into your hands I gave it. And the ones in ambush shall rise up quickly from out of their place." And Joshua stretched the javelin and his hand against the city, and the ones in ambush rose up quickly from out of their place, and they went forth when he stretched out the hand. And they entered into the city, and overtook it. And hastening, they burned the city in fire. And the inhabitants of Ai, looking about unto the rear of them, then viewed the smoke of the city ascending into the heaven, and no longer had they anywhere to flee, here on this side or here on that side. And the people, fleeing into the wilderness, turned upon the ones pursuing. And Joshua and all Israel beheld that the ones in ambush took the city, and that the smoke of the city ascended into the heaven. And turning, they struck the men of Ai. And these came forth from out of the city to meet them. And they came in the midst of the camp, some of these here and some of these here. And they struck them until there was not one being left behind of them, being delivered and escaping. And the king of Ai was seized alive, and they led him to Joshua. And it happened, as the sons of Israel ceased killing all the ones in Ai, and in the plains, and in the mountain upon the descent of which they pursued them, that all fell by the mouth of the broadsword, by it unto completion. And Joshua returned to Ai, and struck it by the mouth of the broadsword. And it came to pass, all the ones falling in that day, from man and unto woman, 12,000, all the ones dwelling in Ai. And Joshua returned not his hand, which he stretched out by the javelin, until he devoted to consumption the whole of the ones dwelling Ai. Except the cattle and the spoils in that city, the sons of Israel despoiled for themselves, according to the order of the Lord, in which manner the Lord gave orders to Joshua. And Joshua burned the city by fire, and he established it for an embankment into the Aeon, uninhabited until this day. And the king of Ai, he hung upon a twin tree, and he was upon the tree until the time of the evening. And at the setting of the sun Joshua gave orders, and they lowered his body from the tree, and tossed him into the cesspool before the gate of the city, and set over him a large heap of stones until this day. Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel on Mount Ebal, as Moses, the attendant of the Lord, gave charge to the sons of Israel, as it is written in the law of Moses, an altar entirely stone, upon which an iron tool was not put upon it. And he transported there whole burnt offerings to the Lord, and a sacrifice of deliverance offering. And Joshua wrote upon the stones the second book of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the sons of Israel. And all Israel, and their elders, and their magistrates, and their scribes, were coming near on this side and that side before the ark. And the priests and the Levites lifted the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And the foreigner and the native born were there, the halves of them neighboring Mount Gerizim, and the halves neighboring Mount Ebal, as Moses, the attendant of the Lord, gave charge at first to bless the people Israel. And after these things Joshua read the whole sayings of this law, the blessings and the curses, according to all the things being written in the law of Moses. There was not a word from all which Moses gave charge to Joshua, which Joshua did not read into the ears of all the assembly of Israel, to the men, and to the women, and to the servants, and to the foreigners going with Israel.